The scent of smoke and cold iron always meant one thing in Frosthold. Important wolves were gathering, and Omegas like me needed to disappear. I pressed myself against the stone wall of the upper corridor, arms wrapped around a bundle of fresh linens that smelled of lavender and lye. Below, in the vast courtyard, banners snapped in the winter wind, crimson and silver. Black and gold, the colors of the great houses, Drax, Thorn, Varric, all converging on our kingdom for the first time in a decade. The convergence. Everyone whispered about it in hushed, reverent tones, like speaking too loudly might shatter whatever fragile peace held the Pax together. I knew what it really meant. Politics, power. And somewhere in the center of it all, a decision that would reshape Varen. Alpha King Darian Frost would finally choose his queen. My fingers tightened on the linens as I watched from my shadowed alcove. The arriving alphas moved through the courtyard like predators assessing territory, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in furs and leather that probably cost more than I'd see in a lifetime. Their wolves radiated through their human skin. You could feel it in the air, thick and electric. I wasn't supposed to be watching. Omegas like me were meant to keep our heads down, finish our work, and stay invisible. But I'd learned long ago that invisible didn't mean blind. Still lurking in corners? Little ghost? I flinched. Kaya Rowan's voice cut through the cold air like a blade. She stood at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a deep green cloak lined with rabbit fur. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and her lips curved in that familiar, cruel smile. I started. But she'd already turned away, laughing with Aveline Mora, another high-ranked she-wolf whose father controlled half the trade routes into Frosthold. Frosthold's favorite ghost, Aveline said, loud enough for me to hear. I'm amazed she hasn't blown away in the wind. Does she even have a wolf, or is she just pretending? Heat crawled up my neck. My wolf stirred inside me, weak, late blooming, but there. She'd come to me only 2 years ago, when most wolves shifted for the first time at 16. I was 23 now, and my shift still hurt, still felt incomplete, like trying to wear clothes that didn't quite fit. I ducked my head and hurried past them, their laughter following me down the corridor. The great hall buzzed with preparation. Servants rushed everywhere, carrying platters of roasted venison, flagons of dark wine, wheels of cheese studded with herbs. The long table had been set with Frosthold's finest, pewter plates polished to a mirror shine, goblets carved from horn, candles in iron holders that cast dancing shadows across the stone walls. Above it all, the carved wolves of House Frost seemed to watch from the rafters, ancient, judging. Saphira. I turned to find Era Thorn, head healer and one of the few people in Frosthold who'd ever been kind to me. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her sharp eyes assessed me with the same clinical precision she used on her patients. You're needed in the hall tonight. Serving. My stomach dropped. The feast? Yes. We're short-handed with half the castle preparing for the arrival ceremonies. You'll pour wine and clear plates. Keep your head down. Speak only when spoken to. And for the love of the old gods, don't spill anything. I nodded, though my hands had started to shake. Serving meant being in the same room as them. The alphas, the nobles, the king himself. Era's expression softened slightly. You'll be fine. Just remember you're part of the walls. Nobody notices the walls. But I wanted to be noticed. Just once. Not as a ghost or a mistake, or the Omega, with the broken shift. Just as someone. I didn't say that, of course. I just nodded again, and took the clean apron Ira handed me. The feast began at sundown. I stood against the far wall with 3 other Omegas, all of us dressed in identical gray dresses and white aprons. We were meant to blend in, to move through the crowd like water, filling cups and removing plates without drawing attention. The hall had transformed. Torches blazed in their sconces, casting the room in warm gold light. The long table stretched the length of the hall, and every seat was filled with wolves who looked like they'd stepped out of legend. And at the head of the table, in a chair that might as well have been a throne, sat Darian Frost. I'd seen him before, but only from a distance. Glimpses in the training yard, his voice carrying commands across the courtyard, his silhouette dark against the snow. Up close, even from across the room, he was something else entirely. Dark hair, longer on top and shorter at the sides, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, pale eyes that seemed to catch the torchlight and throw it back, cold and assessing. He wore black leather and deep blue wool, the colors of House Frost. And when he moved, every wolf in the room tracked him. He didn't smile, didn't laugh at the jokes his advisors made. He listened, nodded, spoke in a low voice that somehow carried more weight than shouting. Merrick Voss sat at his right hand, a massive beta with scars crossing his knuckles. Theron Cade sat at his left, lean and sharp-eyed, fingers drumming against the table. Both watched the room like they expected an attack at any moment. Maybe they did. The tensions between the houses were legend. Ronan Drax, alpha of a northern territory, sat halfway down the table with his jaw tight and his eyes calculating. Lucian Thorne, from the eastern mountains, kept one hand on his belt where a knife probably hid. Even Evren Varric, who smiled and drank and laughed, had the look of a wolf ready to bite. The she-wolves positioned near Darien were just as dangerous in their own way. Rowena Kale, daughter of a powerful trade lord, wore midnight blue silk that clung to her curves. Isolde Marin, from a family of warriors, had arms like iron and a smile that promised violence. Thalia Wren, golden-haired and graceful, looked like something from a fairy tale. Any one of them could be queen by morning. "Wine," someone barked, and I jumped. I grabbed a flagon and moved forward, weaving between chairs. My heart hammered against my ribs. I kept my eyes down, focused on the task. Pour. Move. Don't spill. Don't speak. A hand shot out and caught my wrist. I froze, looked up. Kaya Rowan stared at me with those cold, dark eyes, her fingers tight around my arm. "Clumsy," she said, loud enough to draw attention. "You nearly poured wine down my dress." I hadn't. I'd been nowhere near her. But her grip tightened, and I knew what she wanted. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Louder. "I'm sorry, Lady Rowan." She released me with a dismissive flick of her fingers. Around us, wolves smirked or looked away. Nobody corrected her. Nobody defended me. I was part of the walls. And walls didn't fight back. I finished my round and retreated to the shadows, heart still racing. My wolf whined inside me, ashamed and angry all at once. The feast continued. Speeches were made, toasts offered. The alphas postured and laughed and drank, while the she-wolves smiled and flirted and assessed. I watched Darien Frost through it all. He barely touched his food, barely spoke unless directly addressed. His gaze swept the room constantly, measuring, evaluating. Once, just once, I thought his eyes landed on me. But that was impossible. Kings didn't see ghosts. The attack came just after midnight. I was clearing plates from a side table when the explosion hit. The sound shattered the night, a deep, bone-rattling boom that shook the walls and sent goblets crashing to the floor. Screams erupted. Wolves leapt to their feet, chairs toppling. Smoke poured through the shattered windows, thick and black and choking. "The courtyard," someone shouted. "They hit the lower courtyard." Chaos. Pure, animal chaos. The she-wolves in their fine dresses pushed toward the inner doors, shrieking. Isolde Marin grabbed Thalia Wren and shoved her ahead. Eveline Mora knocked an Omega to the floor in her rush to escape. The alphas drew weapons. Darien Frost was already moving, Merrick and Theron flanking him, their wolves rising in their eyes. "Secure the keep." Darien's voice cut through the panic like a blade. "Get the civilians to the inner chambers. Warriors with me." I stood frozen against the wall, flagon still in my hand. The smoke stung my eyes. My lungs burned. "Run!" my brain screamed. "Hide. Survive." But my feet carried me the other direction, toward the infirmary. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. Or some deeper pull I couldn't name. I just knew that if there'd been an explosion, there would be wounded, and I couldn't hide while others bled. "Hey, quick question, how are you feeling right now? Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. I'm working toward 1,000 subscribers, and if Saphira's story is already pulling at your heart, please hit that subscribe button for Ariel Romance Library, smash the like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Alright, thank you. Now let's get back to what happens when the Omega they called invisible becomes the queen they can't ignore. The infirmary was drowning, not in water. In blood and smoke and screaming wolves who'd been in the wrong place when the explosion tore through the courtyard. Era Thorne moved like a storm, barking orders to her assistant healers, hands already stained red. Naira Hale, younger and quick-fingered, worked on a beta whose leg had been shredded by shrapnel. "Pressure here!" Era snapped at me as I stumbled through the door. "Don't just stand there, move." I dropped the flagon and ran to her side. A warrior lay on the pallet before us, his chest rising and falling in shallow, desperate gasps. His name was Alden Price. I'd seen him in the training yards, laughing with the other guards. Now his face was gray, his tunic soaked through with blood from a wound in his side. "Hold this." Era shoved a bundle of cloth into my hands. "Press down. Hard. Don't let up." I pressed. The cloth turned warm and wet under my palms. Alden's eyes rolled toward me, unfocused, and his lips moved soundlessly. "Stay with us. I whispered. Please, stay. More warriors flooded in. Taryn Holt, bleeding from a gash across his shoulder. A younger wolf whose name I didn't know. Coughing, smoke, and blood. The pallets filled fast. And still more came. Aira worked with the precision of someone who'd done this 100 times. Stitching, binding, mixing salves from jars that lined the shelves, yarrow for bleeding, comfrey for bones, golden seal for infection. Saphira. She didn't look up from the wound she was closing. Behind you. Third shelf, green jar. Bring it. I ran, grabbed the jar, brought it back. She mixed it with something else, creating a paste that smelled sharp and bitter. Good girl. Now help Naira with the one by the door. I moved from pallet to pallet. My hands shook at first, then steadied. Hold pressure here. Tie this bandage. Clean that wound with boiled water, and don't flinch when they scream. The hours blurred together. My gray dress turned dark with blood and soot. My fingers cramped. My back ached. My wolf stirred under my skin, agitated by the pain and fear saturating the air. At some point, I looked up and saw him. Darian Frost stood in the doorway, still in his blood-spattered leathers, speaking low and fast with Merrick Voss. His face was hard, jaw tight, but his eyes swept the infirmary with something that looked almost like grief. He saw the warriors we'd saved, the ones we couldn't. Then his gaze landed on me. I froze, hands buried in a bandage I'd been tying. Soot smudged my cheek. Blood streaked my arms. I must have looked like something dragged from the wreckage. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in those pale eyes, surprise, maybe, or recognition. Then Marek said something, and Darian turned away, striding back into the smoke-filled corridor. Near dawn, Aira pressed a tray into my trembling hands. Take this to the War Council chamber. I stared at her. What? The Alpha King requested updates. Reports on casualties, supplies, which warriors are fit to return to duty. She gestured at the tray. A pot of tea, maps marked with fresh ink, bloodied reports scrawled in Naira's tight handwriting. He's in the council room now with his alphas. You've steadier hands than most of the betas at this point. Aira's expression softened slightly. You did good tonight, Saphira. Real good. The praise hit harder than I expected. I blinked back the sting in my eyes and nodded. The walk to the council chamber felt impossibly long. My legs shook. My hands bandaged now. Burns from hot water and split knuckles from desperate work gripped the tray like a lifeline. The heavy oak doors loomed ahead, flanked by guards who watched me with flat, suspicious eyes. I knocked. Once. Twice. Enter. The voice was low, rough with exhaustion. Unmistakably his. I pushed the door open with my shoulder and stepped into the war room. The War Council chamber was cold, not physically. The fire blazed in the hearth, and candles burned on every surface. But the air itself felt frozen, heavy with tension and the barely contained aggression of powerful alphas locked in a room together. The table stretched across the center, covered in maps marked with red ink, troop positions, border weaknesses, attack patterns, and surrounding it, wolves who could have crushed me without effort. Ronan Drax sat to the left, arms crossed, his scarred face unreadable. Lucian Thorne leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded but sharp as knives. Ronan Drace and Lucian Corin, lesser alphas from border territories, watched me enter with open curiosity. Arn Solon, an advisor with silver, threading his dark hair, frowned at the interruption. At the head of the table, Darian Frost. He'd washed the blood from his hands and face, but exhaustion carved lines around his eyes. His dark hair was pushed back, still damp. He'd changed into clean clothes, black linen. No armor, but somehow looked more dangerous without it. Reports from the infirmary. I managed, voice barely above a whisper. Every eye in the room fixed on me. I crossed to the table on shaking legs and set the tray down. Tea sloshed slightly in the pot. My burned fingers fumbled with the handle. A hand caught my wrist. Not roughly, but firmly enough to steady the pot before I spilled it everywhere. I looked up. Darian Frost was close enough that I could see the flecks of darker blue in his pale eyes. Could smell pine and cold air and something uniquely him. Easy, Saphira. My name. He'd said my name. Not Omega. Not you. Saphira. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Nobody knew my name. I was invisible. Part of the walls. You've been in the infirmary all night. It wasn't a question. His thumb brushed the edge of the bandage on my hand, and his jaw tightened. These need proper attention. I'm fine, Your Majesty. The words came out automatic, rehearsed. You're shaking. I'll just deliver the reports and go. But his hand didn't release my wrist. Instead, he looked past me to the council. Saphira worked through the attack, saved lives while others ran. Ronan Drax made a dismissive sound. Impressive for an Omega, I'm sure. But we have strategy to discuss, Darian. Then we can discuss it with someone who's earned her place in this room. Darian's tone left no room for argument. He pulled out the chair beside his own, the one reserved for his second, currently empty since Merrick had left to oversee the outer defenses. Sit. I stared at him. I can't. The healers don't have hands to spare, Saphira. I'll not have yours shaking themselves to pieces. Quieter. Meant only for me. Sit, please. I sat. The chair was too large. My feet barely touched the floor. I felt every wolf in that room watching me, judging, waiting for me to fail. Darian poured tea himself and set the cup in front of me. Then he turned back to the council as if nothing unusual had happened. Continue, Arryn. Arn Solen cleared his throat and launched into a report about the explosion. Coordinated, timed perfectly to hit during the feast. Likely an inside source providing information. The words washed over me. I tried to focus, tried to follow the strategy discussions and border concerns and political implications, but exhaustion pulled at me like a riptide. The tea warmed my hands. The fire crackled. Darian's presence at my side felt solid, grounding, oddly safe. My eyelids grew heavy. I jerked myself awake twice, 3 times, but the room kept blurring at the edges, voices fading into a low hum. The 4th time, I didn't catch myself. I woke to silence. Not the comfortable kind. The shocked, breath-held, someone just made a terrible mistake kind of silence. My cheek pressed against something warm and solid that smelled like pine and winter. Strong, steady. My body felt weightless, wrapped in something soft and heavy. Awareness crept back slowly. I'd fallen asleep. In the War Council chamber. On someone, horror flooded through me. Ice cold and immediate. I tried to pull back, to jerk away, but the weight around my shoulders tightened slightly. Easy. That low voice again, right above my head. Calm. Unbothered. Don't rush. I forced my eyes open. The council chamber. Still there. The alphas. Still staring. And me. Curled sideways in the chair. My head resting against Darian Frost's shoulder. His blue cloak wrapped around me like a blanket. Oh gods. Oh gods. What had I done? I scrambled back, nearly falling out of the chair. The cloak slipped. Darian caught it smoothly, draping it across my lap instead. I'm sorry, I gasped. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean. You were exhausted. He stood, and the movement was so fluid, so controlled, that it drew every eye. The council is adjourned until nightfall. You have your orders. Ronan Drax's face had gone purple. You're dismissing us because an Omega fell asleep? I'm dismissing you because my healer needs rest. And because I've heard enough tonight. Darian's expression could have been carved from ice. We meet again at sunset. Anyone who can't manage that is welcome to leave Frosthold now. The alphas rose slowly, reluctantly. Ronan Drace and Lucien Corin exchanged glances. Arn Solen looked like he'd swallowed glass. Darian didn't wait for them to file out. He moved to my side, and before I could process what was happening, he'd slipped one arm under my knees and the other behind my back. What? You can barely stand. I can walk. But he'd already lifted me. And the world tilted as he straightened. I weighed nothing to him. The cloak still wrapped around me, soft against my ruined dress. He carried me toward the doors. The guards scrambled to open them. Beyond, the corridor stretched dark and empty in the pre-dawn light. Except it wasn't empty. Kaya Rowan stood frozen near the stairwell, eyes wide with shock. Aveline Mora beside her, mouth open. A handful of servants and guards, all staring. Darian walked past them like they were ghosts. My face burned. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor. But his arms stayed firm around me, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear. Let them look, he murmured. Too quiet for anyone else to hear. Sleep, little Omega. Let the kingdom be shocked. I drifted. Half asleep, half aware. The corridors passed in a blur of stone and torchlight. His scent surrounded me, pine and cold air and something deeper, like winter earth under snow. Safe. My wolf whispered the word like a revelation. Safe. That made no sense. I was being carried by the Alpha King through Frosthold Keep while dozens of wolves watched and whispered. This was the opposite of safe, but my body didn't believe that. My body melted against him, trusting, and I was too exhausted to fight it. He took me to a small room near the infirmary. Clean, simple, a bed with actual blankets. Era will check your hands when she can, he said, lowering me onto the mattress. Sleep as long as you need. I should have thanked him. Should have apologized again. But the words tangled on my tongue, and exhaustion dragged me down before I could untangle them. The last thing I saw was Darian Frost pulling the door closed behind him, his expression unreadable in the dim light. I woke to daylight and disaster. The sun streamed through the narrow window, too bright, too cheerful. My body ached in a dozen places. My hands throbbed under their bandages. And voices drifted through the door. Low, urgent, talking about me, carried her out in front of everyone. Embarrassed himself for an Omega, sleeping on his shoulder like she had any right. I sat up slowly, dread settling heavy in my stomach. The room was sparse but clean. Someone had left fresh water in a basin, and a simple gray dress folded on the chair. My ruined clothes from last night were gone. I washed quickly, wincing as the water stung my raw hands, changed into the clean dress, tried to smooth my hair into something less wild. It didn't help. I still looked like exactly what I was, a nobody Omega who'd somehow ended up at the center of a scandal. When I opened the door, the whispers stopped. 3 servants stood in the corridor. They looked at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. "So you're awake," one said. Not unkindly, but not friendly either. "Era wants you back in the infirmary." I nodded and hurried past them, feeling their stares like brands between my shoulder blades. The infirmary was quieter today. Most of the wounded had been moved to recovery rooms. A few remained on pallets, sleeping or staring at the ceiling. Era looked up from bandaging a wolf's arm. "There you are. How are the hands?" "Fine." "Liar, sit." I sat. She unwrapped the bandages with practiced efficiency, examining the burns and split knuckles. "Could be worse. Keep them clean. I'll give you salve." "Era," I said quietly. "What happened last night?" "You fell asleep on the Alpha King in the middle of a war council." She didn't look up from rewrapping my hands. "The entire castle is talking about it. Some think you bewitched him. Some think he was testing his council's loyalty. And some," she paused, finally meeting my eyes, "some think you're braver or more stupid than anyone gave you credit for. I didn't mean to. I was just so tired." "I know. But intentions don't matter now. You broke protocol, touched the king, fell asleep in his presence." She tied off the bandage. "By rights, you should be punished." Fear clawed up my throat. "What will happen?" "I don't know. But you've been summoned to the Great Hall. The Alpha King is hearing petitions this afternoon, and your name is on the list." The walk to the Great Hall felt like walking to an execution. Wolves lined the corridors, all of them watching. Some looked curious, others angry. A few mostly other Omegas looked terrified on my behalf. Kaya Rowan intercepted me near the stairs. Well, well." She circled me slowly, predator assessing prey. The little ghost finally gets her moment in the spotlight. "How does it feel?" I kept my eyes down. "I don't want trouble." "Too late for that. You made us all look weak last night. You think the other kingdoms didn't notice? You think they're not laughing at us right now?" She leaned in close, voice dropping to a hiss. "Whatever happens in that hall, you deserve it." She swept past me, leaving the scent of roses and venom in her wake. The great hall was packed. Every noble who'd stayed for the convergence was there. Alphas, betas, high-ranked she-wolves in their finest clothes, all arranged along the walls like an audience waiting for a show. And at the far end, on the carved stone throne of House Frost, sat Darian. He wore formal attire today, midnight blue and black, the colors of his house. A circlet of hammered silver rested on his dark hair. He looked every inch a king, cold, remote, untouchable. Marek Voss stood at his right hand, Theron Cade at his left. Both watched the crowd with the intensity of wolves expecting an attack. I was led forward by a guard. Every step echoed, every eye followed. I stopped at the base of the dais and dropped into a curtsy, so deep my knees touched the stone. "Saphira Dune," Marek Voss announced, voice carrying across the hall. "Called to answer for conduct unbecoming an Omega in the presence of the Alpha King." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Satisfied. Vindicated. "Your Majesty." Isolde Marin stepped forward, her warrior's build making her look carved from stone. "The Omega's behavior last night was an insult to this court. She touched you without permission, fell asleep in your presence, showed profound disrespect. She should be punished," Aveline Mora added. "Demoted. Removed from the keep entirely." Rowena Kale's voice joined the chorus. "The other kingdoms will see this as weakness. We must show strength." The voices built on each other, a tide of anger and judgment. I kept my head bowed, hands clenched in my skirts. This was it. The end of whatever strange protection I'd briefly had. Then Darian spoke. Enough. One word. Quiet. But it cut through the noise like a blade through silk. The hall fell silent. He rose from the throne, and the movement drew every eye. He descended the dais steps slowly, deliberately, until he stood just above me. Look at me, Saphira. I forced my head up, met those pale eyes. No anger there, no disgust. Something else, something I couldn't name. You worked through the attack last night, he said. Not a question. A statement for the court to hear. In the infirmary. With the healers. Yes, Your Majesty. How many warriors did you help save? I blinked. I don't know. I didn't count. Alden Price, Era Thorne called from the crowd. Taryn Holt, Corin Ash, Bram Torvik. At least a dozen others lived because she was there. Darian's gaze never left mine. While nobles fled to safety, you ran toward the wounded. While others panicked, you kept your head and your hands steady. I just did what needed doing. Exactly. He turned to face the court. This Omega saved lives. Worked until she collapsed from exhaustion. And when summoned to deliver reports, she came despite her own injuries. He moved closer, until I could feel the heat radiating from him. His fingers lifted my chin, gentle but firm, forcing me to hold his gaze. The crime you're all so eager to punish, he said, voice carrying to every corner of the hall, is that she trusted me enough to rest in my presence. Confused murmurs. Ronan Drax frowned. Trusted you? She fell asleep. That's exactly what I said. Darian's tone sharpened. There is an old law in Varen, the oath of trust. Any wolf who can rest in an alpha's presence, heart steady, scent calm, no fear is considered aligned with that alpha. Bound to them. Silence. Then chaos. You can't be serious. And Omega? That law was meant for. This is madness, Darian. He raised one hand, and the hall quieted again. This Omega saved your warriors, worked herself to collapse, and you want her punished because she briefly rested while exhausted? He turned back to me, and his voice dropped lower. Meant for me, but the hall was quiet enough that everyone heard. From this night forward, Saphira Dune stands under my personal protection. Any insult to her is an insult to the crown of Varen. The hall erupted. Outrage, shock, disbelief. But Darian just held my gaze, and something passed between us. A question, a promise, a choice. The aftermath was brutal. Some wolves bowed their heads in acceptance. Others whispered furiously. Kaya Rowan looked like she'd swallowed poison. Ronan Drax stormed from the hall without another word. I stood frozen at the base of the dais, mind spinning. Under his personal protection. What did that mean? Why would he do this? Darian addressed the court briefly, ending the session, then turned and walked from the hall through a side door. Merrick Voss gestured for me to follow. My legs felt disconnected from my body, but I followed. The corridor beyond was empty. Quiet. Darian stopped near a window, overlooking the snow-covered training yard. You didn't have to do that, I said to his back. Yes, I did. They'll hate me now. More than before. They already hated you. He turned, and up close, away from the court's eyes, he looked tired. At least now they'll have to hide it. I don't understand. Why protect me? I'm nobody. You're the Omega who ran toward the wounded while nobles fled, who worked through the night without complaint, who trusted me enough to rest at my side. He moved closer, and I forced myself not to step back. You're not nobody. Saphira. The way he said my name made my breath catch. There will be consequences, he continued. Political ones. Some of the alphas will push back. But the law is the law, and I've invoked it. You're under my protection now. For how long? Something flickered in his eyes. As long as you need it. Before I could respond, rapid footsteps echoed down the corridor. Nissa Vale, one of Era's assistant healers, appeared, slightly breathless. Your Majesty, I have information you requested. Darian's expression shifted. All business. Saphira's history? Yes. Nissa glanced at me, something like surprise in her eyes. It took some digging. Most records from that far back are incomplete. But I found something. She held out a rolled parchment. Darian took it, scanning the contents quickly. His eyebrows rose. You're certain? As certain as I can be with 20-year-old records. What? I couldn't stay quiet. What is it? Darian looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something close to wonder in his expression. You're not lowborn, Saphira. Your bloodline traces back to House Vale, a healer line thought lost decades ago. The world tilted sideways. That's impossible. I'm an orphan. I was raised in the servants' quarters. Your mother was Liana Vale, Nissa said gently. She died in childbirth. Your father was a traveling merchant who never returned. With no family to claim you, you were raised by the castle. But the blood is there. House Vale. I'd heard the name in history lessons. They'd been healers and mediators, balancing the fiercer instincts of houses like Frost. But they'd been wiped out in a border war 20 years ago, or so everyone thought. You're the last of them, Darian said quietly. The last ember of a line that once stood at the king's side. I couldn't process it. Couldn't reconcile this new information with everything I'd believed about myself. Does it matter? The words came out sharper than I intended. Does knowing my bloodline suddenly make me worthy of your protection? No. He stepped closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. You were already worthy. But now at least the court has to acknowledge it. Over the next days, I existed in a strange limbo. Officially under the Alpha King's protection. Unofficially the subject of every whispered conversation in Frosthold. Some guards nodded respectfully when I passed. Others turned away. The Omegas were divided. Some clung to me like I was their champion. Others avoided me like I carried plague. Kaya and her circle made their displeasure obvious through pointed silences and cold stares. But the strangest part was how visible I'd become. I couldn't fade into the background anymore. Couldn't disappear into the walls. Every move I made was watched, judged, dissected. And then came the private summons. A guard delivered it at sunset. The Alpha King requested my presence in his private chambers. My stomach dropped. Private chambers. Alone. I changed into the cleanest dress I had. Still simple gray, but at least it wasn't stained. Tried to calm my racing heart. Failed. The walk through the castle felt endless. His chambers were in the North Tower. I'd never been there. Never had reason to be. The guard knocked once, then opened the door. Enter. I stepped inside. The room was warm despite the winter cold outside. A fire crackled in the hearth. Deep blue tapestries hung on the walls, marked with the silver wolf of House Frost. Weapons displayed on racks, swords, daggers, a bow that looked like it could shoot through stone, and windows. Huge windows overlooking the snowfields beyond Frosthold, the world stretching white and endless under the rising moon. Darian stood at one of those windows, still in his formal clothes but with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He turned when I entered. Thank you for coming. I didn't think I had a choice. You always have a choice, Saphira. He gestured to a chair near the fire. Sit, please. I sat. He moved to a side table and poured something from a crystal decanter. Brought 2 cups back. Wine? I've never had wine. Then this is water. But yes, you have. I took the cup. Our fingers brushed, and a spark of heat shot up my arm. I pulled back quickly, and something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. He took the chair across from me. The fire cast shadows across his face, softening the hard edges. I wanted to explain, he said, why I did what I did in the hall. Why I'm doing any of this. You don't owe me an explanation. I think I do. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You've been in Frosthold for years. Working. Invisible. And I noticed you. My heart stopped. What? Months ago. In the training yard. You were carrying supplies to the infirmary, and you stopped to help an elder carry firewood. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. Your scent caught me. Warm rain and crushed clover. I've never forgotten it. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. I watched you after that, quietly. The way you helped without expecting thanks. The way you worked twice as hard as anyone else just to prove you belonged. He met my eyes. You've never been invisible to me, Saphira. The words hung between us, heavy with implication. But the law, I managed. The oath of trust. Did you just use that as an excuse? No. The law is real. But I also... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. When you fell asleep against me in the council room, something clicked into place. You weren't afraid of me. Your scent stayed calm. Your heart beat steady. You trusted me without even meaning to. He set down his cup and moved closer. Knelt in front of my chair so we were eye level. I'm not asking you for anything, he said quietly. I'm not demanding you accept me or thank me or feel anything you don't feel. I just needed you to know. You're not nothing. You never were. His hand lifted slowly, giving me time to pull away. When I didn't, his fingers brushed a smudge of soot still clinging to my cheek from days ago. The touch sent electricity through my skin. My wolf surged forward, suddenly awake, suddenly aware. Mate, she whispered. The word I'd been trying to ignore. Mate. Saphira. His voice dropped lower, rough. Tell me if this is unwanted. Tell me if I'm making you uncomfortable. I should have said yes, should have pulled back, should have protected myself. Instead, I leaned into his touch. Just slightly. Just enough. His eyes darkened. His other hand came up to frame my face, thumb brushing my jaw. I would burn this crown before I let anyone hurt you, he said, and it sounded like a vow. Our faces were inches apart. His breath warm against my lips. The space between us charged with something electric and inevitable. He leaned closer, and I stopped thinking. The kiss never happened. Not then. Not in that firelit room with the world falling away, because before our lips could meet, a howl split the night. Long, urgent. The warning call that meant danger at the borders. Darian pulled back instantly, expression shifting from soft to lethal in a heartbeat. Stay here. He was gone before I could respond, moving with the fluid speed of an alpha in his prime. I sat frozen in the chair, heart racing, lips tingling from a kiss that never was. The danger turned out to be scouts from House Drax testing the borders. Not a full assault, but a message. Darian's distraction with an Omega had been noted. Weaknesses were being probed. The next morning, the political pressure boiled over. A formal petition was delivered to the throne room, signed by Ronan Drax, Isolde Marin's father Garrick Marin, and a dozen other high-ranking nobles. They demanded Darian choose a proper queen. Immediately. Someone with political connections, military strength, the right bloodline. Someone who wasn't me. The great hall was packed for the formal hearing. I stood in the back, trying to be invisible again. But Merrick Voss found me and pulled me forward. The king wants you in the hall, near the dais. Why? Orders. So I stood there, visible to everyone, while the nobles made their case. Ronan Drax spoke first, his voice carrying across the stone. With respect, Your Majesty, this situation with the Omega has created instability. Our allies question your judgment. Our enemies sense opportunity. Garrick Marin stepped forward next. The crown needs a queen who can strengthen alliances, not a nobody with no connections, no power. No. Enough. Darian's voice cut through the hall like winter wind. He rose from his throne, descending the dais with the controlled grace of a predator. You question my judgment? We question your priorities, Ronan said carefully. And Omega? In the role of... I never said she'd be queen. The hall went silent. I felt like I'd been slapped. Darian continued, addressing the crowd. I said she was under my protection. I invoked the oath of trust because she earned it. But I made no declaration of intent beyond that. Something inside me cracked. Of course, he'd never promised anything. Never said I mattered beyond being useful. However, Darian turned, and his eyes found mine across the crowd. If I were to choose a queen, I would choose someone who ran toward danger while others fled. Someone who worked through the night to save lives. Someone who proved their loyalty not through words or politics, but through action. He moved through the crowd toward me. Wolves parted. I would choose someone who trusts me enough to rest at my side, who challenges me without fear, who reminds me that strength isn't just teeth and claws. He stopped in front of me, close enough to touch. So, if you're asking me to choose, he said, voice carrying to every corner of the hall, I choose her. The hall erupted. Shouts of outrage. Gasps of shock. Kaya Rowan's face went white with fury. Ronan Drax stepped forward, hand on his sword hilt. This is madness. You'll tear the kingdom apart for an Omega? I'll tear it apart for anyone who thinks bloodline matters more than loyalty. Darian's voice was ice. Anyone who disagrees is free to leave. Nobody moved. Then Isolde Marin spoke up. If she's to be considered for such a role, let her speak for herself. Let the court see if she has the spine for it. All eyes turned to me. My mouth went dry. My hands shook. This was a trap. Speak too boldly, and they'd call me arrogant. Speak too meekly, and they'd call me weak. But something Darian had said echoed in my mind. You trusted me without meaning to. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. I stepped forward. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I spoke. You want to know if I have the spine for this? I looked at Isolde, then at the others. While you were safe behind stone walls during the attack, I was in the infirmary. I held warriors while they bled. I stitched wounds while my hands burned. I worked until I collapsed. I turned slowly, meeting as many eyes as I could. You call me weak because I'm Omega. Because my shift came late. Because I don't have your power or your connections. My voice strengthened. But I was there when it mattered. When your sons and brothers and mates needed someone to save them, I didn't run. I didn't hide. I stayed. Silence. Heavy. Shocked. So judge me if you want, I finished. Call me nobody, but I know what I am, and I know what I've done. That's more than some of you can say. The words hung in the air. Then, from the crowd, Alden Price stepped forward, the warrior I'd helped save. His arm was bandaged, but he stood tall. The Omega speaks truth, he said. She saved my life. I'd follow her into battle before half the nobles in this room. Taryn Holt joined him, as would I. One by one, warriors stepped forward. Not all of them, but enough. Darian watched it happen with something like pride in his eyes. When the hall finally quieted, he addressed the court one final time. The petition is denied. Saphira Dune remains under my protection. Anyone who cannot accept that is welcome to leave Frosthold. He turned to me, offered his hand. Walk with me. I took it, and together, we walked from the hall, past stunned nobles and whispering crowds, toward whatever came next. His chambers again, but different this time. The tension from before returned tenfold. The almost kiss that still hung between us like unfinished business. Darian closed the door, locked it, turned to face me. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For dragging you into this. For making you a target. Don't. I crossed the space between us, surprising myself with my boldness. Don't apologize for the one time someone saw me as more than nothing. His eyes darkened. Saphira, you said I trusted you. You were right. I do. I don't know why. I don't know how. But I do. You shouldn't. His voice was rough. I'm selfish. I'm pulling you into a war you didn't ask for. Maybe I want to be pulled. The words hung between us, charged with meaning. He moved first, hand cupping my jaw, thumb tracing my lower lip. Tell me to stop. No. His mouth crashed into mine. Not gentle. Not tentative. A kiss that tasted like desperation and relief, and something deeper than words. His other hand wrapped around my waist, pulling me flush against him. I gripped his shirt, anchoring myself as the world tilted. Heat flooded through me. My wolf surged forward, singing, finally alive. His scent surrounded me, pine and winter and male. He backed me against the wall, mouth never leaving mine. His hands framed my face, holding me like something precious even as he kissed me like he was drowning. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. I've wanted to do that since the training yard, he murmured. You should have. He laughed, the sound low and rough. I'm a king. I can't just kiss Omegas in training yards. You can now. His eyes blazed. Yes, I can. He kissed me again, slower this time, deeper. His hands slid down my sides, careful, asking permission with every touch. I answered by pulling him closer. We didn't go further. Not then. The moment was too new, too fragile. And Darian, despite everything, still had the presence of mind to slow down. Not like this, he said, pulling back slightly. Not when you're still processing everything. Not when the court is waiting to tear you apart. I'm not afraid. I am. He kissed my forehead. I'm terrified of losing you before I've even had you. The vulnerability in his voice made my chest ache. Then don't lose me, I whispered. Keep me. His arms tightened around me. Always. 3 days later, news arrived. Ronan Drax had mobilized troops at the northern border. Not a full invasion, but enough to make a point. Darian's choices had consequences. The War Council met again. This time, I was invited. Not to serve. To sit at the table. The Alphas stared, but nobody protested. Darian had made his position clear. Drax is testing us, Merrick Voss said, pointing at the map. He wants to see if we'll fracture under pressure. Then we show him we're united, Darian replied. We move to the border, a show of force, not an attack. Make it clear that Frosthold stands firm. And what about her? Lucienne Thorne nodded at me. If you bring her, she stays here, Darian said. Safe. No. Every head turned toward me. I stay, I repeated. You want unity? Then show the kingdom that an Omega can stand beside Alphas, that we're not weak, that we belong. Darian's jaw tightened. Saphira, you said you chose me. Prove it. Don't hide me away the moment things get dangerous. Silence. Then Merrick Voss, surprisingly, nodded. She has a point. She'll be a target, Theron Cade argued. I've always been a target, I said quietly. At least now I have teeth. Darian looked at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. She comes, but she stays at the center of our formation, protected. The journey to the border took 2 days. I rode in a wagon with supplies and healers. watching the landscape change from castle grounds to wild forests to snow-covered plains. Warriors surrounded us. Some glanced at me with curiosity, others with grudging respect. At night, we camped under stars so bright they looked like frost scattered across velvet. Darian found me by the fire after the others had settled. "You're quiet." "Thinking. About? How strange this is. A week ago, I was invisible. Now I'm riding to face a border conflict beside the Alpha King." He sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. "Regrets?" "No." I looked at him, scared. "But no regrets." He reached over, took my hand, laced our fingers together. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "you're not alone anymore." The border confrontation never escalated into full war. Darian's show of force, combined with strategic positioning and a carefully worded message about unity, made Ronan Drax reconsider. He pulled his troops back, agreeing to formal negotiations rather than violence. A victory, small but significant. On the ride back to Frosthold, the warriors sang traveling songs. Even some who'd looked at me with suspicion smiled when I passed. I'd proven something. Not just to them, to myself. A week after returning, Darian called a formal gathering in the Great Hall. Every noble, every alpha, everyone who mattered in Varen politics. I stood at his side on the dais, heart hammering. He rose from his throne, commanding instant silence. "You've questioned my choices," he began. "Questioned my judgment regarding Saphira Dune. Some of you have protested, others have threatened. The hall was so quiet you could hear breathing. So I'm making this clear, once and for all." He turned to me, held out his hand. "Saphira Dune, will you stand beside me? Not as a servant, not as a protected subject, but as my equal, as my mate, as the Queen of Varen." The world stopped. "Queen," he'd said, "Queen." Every eye in the hall bored into me, waiting, judging. I thought about the girl I'd been, invisible, forgotten, convinced she was worth nothing. I thought about the Omega who'd run into smoke and blood to save lives. I thought about falling asleep on his shoulder and waking to find someone had finally seen me. I took his hand. Yes. The hall erupted. Some in celebration, some in shock, some in fury. But Darian pulled me close, and in front of everyone, kissed me. Not chaste, not political, a kiss that promised forever. Later that night, he took me to the balcony overlooking Frosthold. The moon hung full and silver above us. Snow glowed in the distance. The wolves of Varen howled somewhere beyond the walls. He wrapped his blue cloak around my shoulders, the same one from that first night. "They'll talk for years," I said softly. "About the poor Omega who became queen. Let them." He pulled me against his chest. "I would rather have one Omega who trusts me enough to sleep on my shoulder than 100 queens who stand at my side and secretly dream of my death." I tilted my head back to look at him. "You really mean that?" "Every word." He kissed me again, slow and deep and full of promise. His hands slid down my back, gentle but possessive. Mine curled in his shirt, pulling him closer. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "History will remember this," he murmured. "The night a king chose an Omega over politics." "No," I smiled. "They'll remember the night an Omega chose herself. I was the Omega who fell asleep on the Alpha King's shoulder. They thought that was the scandal. They were wrong. The real scandal was that, when I finally opened my eyes, I refused to look away. And in refusing, I changed everything."